Elise here at Bowman Library with a whole new middle grade book spotlight. So our theme for this week, we are going back to a decade that basically a lot of things happened. It was a pretty epic decade. That would be the 1920s, the Roaring 20s, the Jazz Age. Yeah, there's so much stuff that happened in this 10 years that we have 6 amazing books that focus on people, places, events. We have some awesome fiction, nonfiction, so let's get started so we can discover some things that maybe we didn't quite know, because I will tell you this, reading some of these, I learned a ton. So our first one is Al Capone in the Roaring 20s, because if you're going to talk about the 1920s, you have to talk about Al Capone. Now, he is basically like probably one of the most well-known gangsters. Some people might even consider him like the original gangster. He's, like king of all of them. So at one point, he was the man who ran the whole city of Chicago, because he was in charge of everything illegal, and that's what happened at the time. Everything illegal ran the big cities. Not only did he run like the city of Chicago, he was arrested numerous times. He was put in prisons all over this country. There was a prison in Pennsylvania he was in for a while. He even ended up on Alcatraz off the coast of California. And then he gained this epic folklore type following over the years. And while some people think what he did was pretty bad, other people, were like, what? For all the stuff he did, it actually ended up maybe helping people in a way as well. So you will have to read this book to become an Al Capone expert, and you can make your own opinion on what you think Al Capone's legacy should or should not be. This is Al Capone in the Roaring 20s. Dave at Night. So it's Harlem, 1926, and Dave Caros is growing up an orphan. His parents have died, no one else in his family wants to take him, and so then he ends up being placed at what's called the Hebrew Home for Boys. And it's supposed to be this home that boys can go and they can grow up together, and it actually turns out to be this pretty brutal place in which they are treated horribly. All of their belongings are taken from them when they get there, and they are just forced to live this life that no one should have to live. Vowing to run away, the only thing he wants to bring with him is this Noah's Ark that his father carved for him, but it was taken away from him when he got there, and he won't leave until he has this object. So, while trying to figure out how he's going to get that, Dave starts sneaking out at night so he can start planning that part of his escape. And when he sneaks out, he starts to discover that there's this whole other world which takes place on the outside of his home. And he starts to lead this double life to an extent, because he starts mixing it up with the great people of the Harlem Renaissance at the time, like these painters and thinkers and artists and musicians and writers. And before he knows it, he thinks that getting involved with these people could actually be his way out of his life being an orphan, filled with history, mystery, adventure, and possibly a fairy tale ending. You'll be feeling all sorts of emotions with Dave as he tries to figure out his life in the 1920s in this Harlem Renaissance, as well as trying to not only save him, but the others back at the orphanage. This is Dave at Night. Beyond the Bright Sea. So, Crow has lived her entire life on this small island off the coast of Massachusetts. She arrived there as a baby. Her parents sent her there for unknown reasons. Like, she literally showed up on the beach. Like, they sent her in this little homemade boat, and there was a note tied to her for someone to take care of her. And that person ended up being Osh and his next door neighbor, Miss Maggie. When she's 12, though, one of the neighboring islands catch fire. And they can see this fire from their island, and the rumor is the island that's on fire is actually an island where people are sent if they have leprosy. It's filled with lepers. And people start to think maybe that's where Crow came from. And she then starts to ask these questions of her own background, but there are no answers, because literally no one knows anything about her except that she just showed up one day. So Crow decides once and for all that she's going to figure out her own life story, even if that means visiting that other island. So this is based on true events in regard to the use of these various islands in the 1920s off the coast of Massachusetts. Especially some of them were used as what are called leper colonies at the time. You will be along for this journey with Crow, though, as she goes through this self-discovery. Amazing story. If you love a good lyrical story, this is Beyond the Bright Sea. Okay, Steve Sheinkin. I love Steve Sheinkin. This book is no exception. This is about an event in history I knew nothing about. It was so incredibly eye-opening. This is called Born to Fly. So back in 1929, there were 20 women pilots who got together and they competed in what was called the Women's Air Derby of 1929. And the goal was for these 20 women to come, and they were put through a series of flying tests and skills, and whoever came out on top was the best female pilot in the world. They came from all different walks. Like probably the most well-known one that was there that I hope everyone has heard of, Amelia Earhart was there. You know, like she brought some legitimacy to this. But then the 19 others were just all these females that learned to fly against all odds, and they all had different walks of life, but they were just as good, if not better, than Amelia Earhart. So this book will introduce you to all of the competitors, as well as the event itself and the various things that took place. And it was incredibly dangerous. One person, whether they were a pilot or a spectator, at least one person every day of this competition died. They were killed due to some accident that took place. So this is one you will not want to put down. It was, again, incredibly eye-opening. I had never heard of this. I so wish I had known about this before this book, but if you read this book, then you will know about it too. So this is Born to Fly. Witness. Okay, so it's Vermont, it's the 1920s, and of all the places you can think of, the Ku Klux Klan arrives to Vermont. Now, I know if you're anything like me, the only thing I ever learned about them in school is it was an organization that was in the South. I guess I had never realized that they were anywhere else, but they were. So this is told through 11 various voices, all townspeople, but there's different ages, different genders, different races, different ethnicities, all being represented in this. And you see firsthand the damage this group does, victimizing various families and businesses throughout the town. Now, this is told through 5 acts, and you see first how the KKK arrived and how they gained a following and traction, and they start gaining some members from people in the town, and then eventually, then it starts leading to intimidation and threatening and committing acts of violence. And finally, the people of the town come together and they decide they are not going to stand for this, and they stand up for themselves, and they're not going to tolerate this group or their behavior. Told as a novel in verse, you will find yourself moved by this book as you take a look at an event in history that, again, is never told or shared, but it needs to be, so we can learn from it and it doesn't happen again. This is Witness. And our last one is The Poison Eater. So think back, if you can, if you were alive in the 1920s, to what it must have been like to eat food. You know, there was no supermarkets, there really were no refrigerators, you know, there was no oven, you know, with like a temperature control, there was no ingredient list on food, and you had no idea what you were actually eating. And believe me, people were adding and mixing in some very weird and very dangerous ingredients. Like, for example, in food, some people put formaldehyde in the milk. Like, that's what they kind of used, like, you know, with dead bodies. And they put borax in meat. Like, we can use that to make slime. And even candy was made with arsenic. That's a straight up poison, which, you know, could literally kill you. So this is all about a man named Harvey Wiley who decided something needed to be done about this. And it needed to be done in order to keep people safe while eating. And then he starts setting up these experiments with volunteers who ended up getting this name, the Poison Eaters. And they started eating some questionable food and having some pretty dramatic results. So due to his efforts, it led to ripples in the government and society, led to testing and eventual the development of the Food and Drug Administration, which is still around today, which requires stuff like ingredients listed on food so you know what exactly you're eating. Amazing, eye-opening, not for the faint of heart. There are some pretty gruesome things. There are some pretty crazy pictures in here. You will find yourself grossed out. I was a little grossed out, especially when you think about food back then. Pretty gross. Love this book though. This is The Poison Eaters. So these are just 6 of the books that we have here at the library that deal, share, are involved in the 1920s. So I encourage you to come on out, check out one of these, or if there's something about the 1920s that we didn't talk about today but you want to know more of, I'm sure we have a book or 2 here that we can help you find so you can learn what it is you want to know about this crazy and amazing decade. So I hope you tune back next week. We have a whole new middle grade book spotlight, and I hope you have a great week.